guys, it's Caleb back again with more Red Knot, and this time we have R.L. Stein Goosebumps. The Scarecrow walks at midnight. It's a field of screams. The cover is okay. Basically it's nighttime, the moon's shining, though it's kind of low. So I guess it might almost be morning, even though this is supposed to be, like midnight. And, we have some really, very prettily colored, crops, I guess that's supposed to be crops. Corn, perhaps. Corns usually grows that tall. But, the Scarecrow himself kinda makes me think, like it's supposed to be scary looking, but I see pug. I see a pug with kind of evil looking eyes, but not much else. To the back, they're alive! Jody loves visiting her grandparents' farm. Okay, so that's not the most exciting place in the world. Still, Grandpa tells great scary stories, and Grandma's chocolate chip pancakes are the best. But this summer, the farm has really changed. The cornfields are sparse, Grandma and Grandpa seem worn out, and the single Scarecrow has been replaced by 12 evil-looking ones. Then one night, Jody sees something really odd. The Scarecrow seems to be moving. The Scarecrows seem to be moving, twitching on their stakes, coming alive. Reader beware, you're in for a scare. Goosebumps. Also available from R.L. Stein, Go Eat Worms. No thank you, 'cause that's gross. Hey Jody, wait up. Chapter 1. I turned and squinted into the bright sunlight. My brother Mark was still on the concrete train platform? Oh, okay. The train had clattered off. I could see it snaking its way through the low green meadows in the distance. I turned to Stanley. Stanley is the haired man on my haired man. Yes, he's a haired man. The hired man on my grandparents' farm. He stood beside me, carrying both suitcases. Look in the dictionary for the word slowpoke, I said, and you'll see Mark's picture. Stanley smiled at me. I like the dictionary, Jody, he said. Sometimes I read it for hours. Hey, Mark, get a move on, I cried. But he was taking his good time. Well, you could say that, but typically I hear it more as taking his sweet time rather than good time. Walking slowly, in a daze as usual. I tossed my blonde hair behind my shoulders and turned back to Stanley. Mark and I hadn't visited the farm for a year, but Stanley still looked the same. He's got some secret voodoo, He's so skinny, like a noodle, my grandma always says. His denim overalls always look 5 sizes too big on him. What's with Mr. Stein and making things baggy on people? I've noticed this is a trend, like a lot. Stanley's about 40 or 45, I think. He wears his dark hair in a crew cut, shaved close to his head. His ears are huge. They stick way out and are always bright red. And he has big, round, brown eyes that remind me of puppy eyes. Stanley isn't very smart. Grandpa Kurt always says that Stanley isn't working with the full 100 watts. So basically, he's mentally challenged, which I kind of got, from the fact that, he was talking about the dictionary. But Mark and I really like him. He has a quiet sense of humor, and he is kind and gentle and friendly, and always has lots of amazing things to show us whenever we visit the farm. You look nice, Jody, Stanley said, his cheeks turning as red as his ears. How old are you now? 12, I told him, and Mark is 11. He thought about it. That makes 23, he joked. We both laughed. You never know what Stanley is going to say. I think I stepped in something gross, Mark complained, catching up to us. I always know what Mark is going to say. My brother only knows 3 words, cool, weird, and gross. Really, that's his whole vocabulary. As a joke, I gave him a dictionary for his last birthday. You're weird, Mark said. Then I handed it to him. What a gross gift. I don't know how getting a dictionary is gross. If you gave me a rotten banana, I would say that's gross. A dictionary is probably more along the boring but useful side. of things. He scraped his white high tops on the ground as he followed Stanley to the beat-up red pickup truck. "Carry my backpack for me," Mark said, trying to shove the bulging backpack at me. "No way," I told him. "Carry it yourself." The backpack contained his Walkman, about 30 tapes, comic books, his Game Boy, and at least 50 game cartridges. I knew he planned to spend the whole month lying on the hammock on the screened-in back porch of the farmhouse, listening to music and playing video games. Well, no way. Mom and Dad said it was my job to make sure Mark got outside and enjoyed the farm. We were so cooped up in the city all year. That's why they sent us to Grandpa Kurt and Grandma Miriam for a month each year, to enjoy the great outdoors. We stopped beside the truck while Stanley searched his overall pockets for the key. "It's going to get pretty hot today," Stanley said, "unless it cools down." A typical Stanley weather report. I gazed out at the wide grassy field beyond the small train station parking lot. Thousands of tiny white puffballs floated up against the clear blue sky. It was so beautiful. Naturally, I sneezed. Yeah. Have I told the story of when I was still in college and I was waiting on my dad or brother, somebody to pick me up, and it was spring, so finals were coming up, but it was spring, and I went outside, and there's like these two big old bushes, like behind a bench outside, and because it's spring, everything's in bloom, and these bushes turned into these beautiful big old flower things. I'm not really sure what kind of flowers they are. I tried describing them to Mom, and she said they were snowballs, but I don't think that's what they were. But anyway, there were a lot of them, and they smelled so good. And I went and I sat on that park bench. I might have sat there, 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30. I didn't really consider it a long time, but I sat there and I just smelled these wonderful flowers, was surrounded by all these huge, good-smelling flowers, and then my dad came and he picked me up and he took me home, and the next day I was so stuffed up, I was surprised I could breathe through my mouth, is how stuffed up I was. And I was that horribly stuffed up for 3 days. I got better each day, but I was still so stuffed, I could not breathe out of my nose. It was like I had a horrible, terrible cold. And never again, no matter how good they smelled or how pretty they were, did I go around those bushes when they were in bloom. Because I am not fucking crazy. But that's usually how shit happens. It's like, oh, hell no, achoo! Well, some of it, okay. I love visiting my grandparents' farm. My only problem is I'm allergic to just about everything on it. So you don't have allergy medicine? So Mom packed several bottles of my allergy medicine for me. And lots of tissues. Oh, okay. Gesundheit, Stanley said. He tossed our 2 suitcases in the back of the pickup. Mark slid his backpack in too. "Can I ride in the back?" he asked. He loves to lie flat in the back, staring up at the sky and bumping up and down really hard. Well, I'll say this. I like to ride in the back of a pickup truck, but it's not fun to bump up and down hard, because usually the back of pickup trucks don't have cushions for your ass. That's the only downside to riding around in the back. It's not very comfortable. But I do like it. It's just, I don't know, there's just something about it sitting there and, as somebody drives the car, the truck, Stanley's a terrible driver. He can't seem to concentrate on steering and driving at the right speed at the same time. So there are always lots of quick turns and heavy bumps. Mark lifted himself into the back of the pickup and stretched out next to the suitcases. I climbed beside Stanley in the front. A short while later, we were bouncing along the narrow, twisting road that led to the farm. I stared out the dusty window at the passing meadows and farmhouses. Everything looked so green and alive. Stanley drove with both hands wrapped tightly around the top of the steering wheel. He sat forward stiffly, leaning over the wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield without blinking. Mr. Mortimer doesn't farm his place anymore, he said, lifting one hand from the wheel to point to a big white farmhouse on top of a sloping green hill. Why not? I asked. Because he died, Stanley replied sullenly. See what I mean? You never know what Stanley's going to say. This seems weird and off to me. It would be to apply this statement accurately to this man who's clearly supposed to be MR, then it would be more like, because he turned into a clown and joined the circus. That would warrant the statement of, see what I mean? You never know what Stanley's going to say. Because that would be that phrase you use to describe somebody saying something outrageous. But here, he says, somebody died. You don't put that statement to somebody who's telling you someone died, unless you think he's joking, or you saw, Mr. whatever the fuck his name was the other day, which you clearly didn't. What a poor choice of words. That's horrible. Why would you say that about somebody telling you somebody else died? We bounced over a deep rut in the road. I was sure Mark was having a great time in the back. The road leads through the small town, so small it doesn't even have a name. The farmers have always called it town. Are you sure about this? Because I'm pretty sure all towns have a name. It has a feed store, a combination gas station and grocery store, a white steeple church, a hardware store, and a mailbox. There were 2 trucks parked in front of the feed store. I didn't see anyone as we barreled past. My grandparents' farm is about 2 miles from town. I recognized the cornfield as we approached. The corn is so high already, I exclaimed, staring through the bouncing window. Have you eaten any yet? Just at dinner, Stanley replied. Suddenly he slowed the truck and turned his eyes to me. The Scarecrow walks at midnight, he uttered in a low voice. Huh? I wasn't sure I heard correctly. The Scarecrow walks at midnight, he repeated, training his big puppy eyes on me. I read it in a book. I didn't know what to say, so I laughed. I thought maybe he was making a joke. Days later, I realized it was no joke. Chapter 2. Watching the farm spread out in front of us filled me with happiness. It's not a big farm or a fancy farm, but I like everything about it. I like the barn with its sweet smells. I'm pretty sure a barn wouldn't smell sweet. I like the low mooing sounds of the cows way off in the far pasture. I like to watch all the tall stalks of corn all swaying together in the wind. Corny, huh? Your pun is lame. It's so lame, and I would punch you for it. I also like the scary ghost stories Grandpa Kurt tells us at night in front of the fireplace. And I have to include Grandma Miriam's chocolate chip pancakes. They're so good. I sometimes dream about them back home in the city. I also like the happy expressions on my grandparents' faces when we come rushing up to greet them. Of course, I was the first one out of the truck. Mark was as slow as usual. I went running up to the screen porch in back of their big old farmhouse. I couldn't wait to see my grandparents. Grandma Miriam came waddling out, her arms outstretched. The screen door slammed behind her, but then I saw Grandpa Kurt push it open, and he hurried out too. His limp was worse, I noticed right away. He leaned heavily on a white cane. He'd never needed one before. I didn't have time to think about it, as Mark and I were smothered in hugs. Good to see you. It's been so long, Grandma, Miriam cried happily. You know, if you just want to say Grandma and Grandpa, that's okay. I don't always need to know what their first names are. Though I will say, Miriam, really? How more stereotypical can you get? There were the usual comments about how much taller we were and how grown up we looked. Jody, where'd you get that blonde hair? There aren't any blondes in my family, Grandpa Kurt would say, shaking his mane of white hair. Sorry if you hear the cat. You must get that from your father's side. No, I know. I bet you got it from a store, he said, grinning. It was his little joke. Yeah, okay. He greeted me with it every summer, and his blue eyes would sparkle excitedly. You're right, it's a wig, I told him, laughing. He gave my long blonde hair a playful tug. Did you get cable yet? Mark asked, dragging his backpack along the ground. Cable TV, Grandpa Kurt said, stared hard at Mark. Not yet, but we still get 3 channels. How many more do we need? And I'll have to actually agree with this because, well, when I had cable, there was shit all to watch. I watched, let's see here, once, even as a child, I watched Nickelodeon, and then CBS, ABC, NBC, maybe 1 or 2 more, and probably PBS. I watched cartoons, and of course Sentai, Power Rangers and Beetleborgs. I hated VR Rangers. As I got older, middle school age, which is about where these books are aiming for their readers, Cartoon Network. And then, of course, what for me didn't involve cartoons, Discovery Channel, because I liked animals, especially cats, and anything that involved detectives or mysteries. And then as I got older, and started watching Sailor Moon when that was on USA Network, because they used to have a cartoon block, which I'd always miss out on because, I'm at school. And they showed like Mighty Max and Street Sharks. I think they showed Street Sharks. But they showed Mighty Max, Street Sharks, Sonic the Hedgehog, 7 a.m., Sailor Moon, which is where I first saw Sailor Moon and got into anime, and maybe 1 or 2 more things, but I don't remember what that was. But yeah. So as a child, I watched maybe about almost 10 channels. And then as I got older, I watched Cartoon Network, really. And that was about it. That and maybe sometimes the Discovery Channel. And then whenever there was a mystery or something on TV, I watched that. And that was about it. Mark rolled his eyes. No MTV. Aren't you a bit young to be watching MTV? He groaned. Stanley made his way past us, carrying our suitcases into the house. Let's go in. I bet you're starving, Grandma Miriam said. I made soup and sandwiches. We'll have chicken and corn tonight. The corn is very sweet this year. I know how you two love it. I watched my grandparents. That seemed very forced and unnatural. I know how you two love it. By the way, you like corn. Corn? You love corn? I watched my grandparents as they led the way to the house. They both looked older to me. They moved more slowly than I remembered. Grandpa Kurt's limp was definitely worse. They both seemed tired. Grandma Miriam is short and chubby. She has a round face surrounded by curly red hair. Bright red. There's no way to describe the color. I don't know what she uses to dye it that color. I've never seen it on anyone else. She wears square-shaped eyeglasses that give her a really old-fashioned look. She likes big, roomy house dresses. I don't think I've ever seen her in jeans or pants. Grandpa Kurt is tall and broad-shouldered. Mom says he was really handsome when she was young, like a movie star, she always tells me. And you've never seen pictures of your grandparents when they were younger? I have a picture of my grandmother when she was in her 20s from the 1940s. Now he was heavy, white hair, still very thick, that he wets and slicks down flat on his head. He has sparkling blue eyes that always make me smile, and a white stubble over his slender face. Grandpa Kurt doesn't like to shave, even though it's just stubble and not actual beard and mustache. Today he was wearing a long-sleeved red and green plaid shirt, buttoned to the collar despite the hot day, and baggy jeans, stained at one knee, held up by white suspenders. Lunch was fun, because lunch is fun, don't you know. We sat around the long kitchen table. Sunlight poured in through the big window. I could see the barn in the back and the cornfield stretching behind it. Mark and I told all our news about school, about my basketball team going to the championships. Wouldn't they have heard about this, like a phone call or something? About our new car, about Dad growing a mustache. For some reason, Stanley thought that was very funny. He was laughing so hard, he choked on his split-pea soup, and Grandpa Kurt had to reach over and slap him on the back. It's hard to know what will crack Stanley up. As Mark would say, Stanley is definitely weird. Well, if he's MR, things are going to be different with him. MR people don't always function the way you would expect a person without MR to function. That's just stuff that happens because the brain is different. All through lunch, I kept staring at my grandparents. I couldn't get over how much they had changed in 1 year. They seemed so much quieter, so much slower. Well, it also depends on how old they are, and sometimes things can go really well, and then they can go bad in the blink of an eye, and you just don't feel as good as you did a year ago. That's what it means to get older, I told myself. Yeah, it's natural. But of course, probably in this book, considering supernatural shit going on, it's probably unnatural. Stanley will have to show you his scarecrows, Grandma Miriam said, passing the bowl of potato chips. Won't you, Stanley? Grandpa Kurt cleared his throat loudly. I had the feeling he was telling Grandma Miriam to change the subject or something. Because it's not obvious that it's just changed the subject. It might be something else. Gee, I don't know what. Maybe he's just clearing his throat because. I made them, Stanley said, grinning proudly. He turned his big eyes on me. The book. It told me how. Are you still taking guitar lessons? Grandpa Kurt asked Mark. I could see that for some reason Grandpa Kurt didn't want to talk about Stanley's scarecrows. Yeah, Mark answered with a mournful mouthful of potato chips. But I sold my acoustic. I switched to electric. You mean you have to plug it in? Stanley asked. He started to giggle, as if he had just cracked a funny joke. What a shame you didn't bring your guitar, Grandma Miriam said to Mark. No, it isn't, I teased. The cows would start giving sour milk. Shut up, Jody, Mark snapped. He has no sense of humor. They already do give sour milk, Grandpa Kurt muttered, lowering his eyes. Bad luck. When the cows give sour milk, it means bad luck, Stanley declared, his eyes widening, his expression suddenly fearful. It's okay, Stanley, Grandma Miriam assured him quickly, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. Grandpa Kurt was only teasing. If you kids are finished, why not go with Stanley? Grandpa Kurt said. He'll give you a tour of the farm. You always enjoy that, he sighed. I'd go along, but my leg, it's been acting up again. Grandma Miriam started to clear the dishes. Mark and I followed Stanley out the back door. The grass in the backyard had recently been mowed. The air was heavy with its sweet smell. Unless you're allergic to it, like my brother, then it's not so sweet. I saw a hummingbird fluttering over the flower garden beside the house. I pointed it out to Mark, but by the time he turned, it had hummed away. Ha 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 ha, because it's a hummingbird and hummed away. You're not cute, and you're not funny, and I tell you now to stop it. At the back of the long green yard stood the old barn. Its white walls were badly stained and peeling. It really needed a paint job. The doors were open, and I could see square bales of straw inside. Far to the right of the barn, almost to the cornfield, stood the small guest house where Stanley lived with his teenage son, Styx. Okay. Stanley, where's Styx? I asked. Why wasn't he at lunch? Went to town, Stanley answered quietly. Went to town riding on a pony. Mark and I exchanged glances. We never can figure Stanley out. Poking up from the cornfield stood several dark figures the Scarecrows Grandma Miriam had started to talk about. I stared out at them, shielding my eyes from the sun with one hand. So many Scarecrows! I exclaimed. Stanley, last summer there was only one. Why are there so many now? He didn't reply. He didn't seem to hear me. Whoops. He had a black baseball cap pulled down low over his forehead. Since when was he wearing that? You can't just suddenly put this in now and say, oh, he was wearing a black baseball cap. I have to introduce these things beforehand when describing people. He was taking long strides, leaning forward with that stork-like walk of his hands shoved into the pockets of his baggy denim overalls. We've seen the farm 100 times, Mark complained, whispering to me. Why do we have to take the grand tour again? Mark, cool your jets, I told him. We always take the tour on the farm. It's tradition. Mark grumbled to himself. He really is lazy. He never wants to do anything. Stanley led the way past the barn and into the cornfields. The stalks were way over my head. Their golden tassels gleamed in the bright sunlight. Stanley reached up and pulled an ear off the stalk. Let's see if it's ready, he said, grinning at Mark and me. Mark and I. He held the ear in his left hand and started to shuck it with his right. Why not just say he started to shuck it? I don't need to know. Do you have to up your word count by being so wordy? You don't need to tell me he held it in his left hand and shucked it with his right. You could just say he got a piece of corn off of a stalk and started to shuck it. And then you can have him say, let's see if it's ready. And then you could talk about it. Whatever. After a few seconds, he pulled the husk away, revealing the ear of corn inside. I stared at it and let out a horrified cry. Chapter 3. Oh, it's disgusting, I shrieked. Gross, I heard Mark groan. The corn was a disgusting brown color, and it was moving on the cob, wriggling and squirming. Stanley raised the corn to his face to examine it, and I realized it was covered with worms. No, Stanley cried in horror. He let the ear of corn drop to the ground at his feet. That's bad luck. The book says so. That's very bad luck. I stared down at the ear of corn. The worms were wriggling off the cob into the dirt. It's okay, Stanley, I told him. I only screamed because I was surprised. This happens sometimes. Sometimes worms get into the corn. Grandpa told me. No, it's bad, Stanley insisted in a trembling voice. His red ears were inflamed. His big eyes revealed his fear. The book, it says so. What book? Mark demanded. He kicked the wormy ear of corn away with the toe of his high top. My book, Stanley replied mysteriously. My superstition book. Oh, I thought. Stanley shouldn't have a book about superstitions. He was already the most superstitious person in the world, even without a book. You've been reading a book about superstitions? Mark asked him, watching the brown worms crawl over the soft dirt. Yes. Stanley nodded his head enthusiastically. It's a good book. It tells me everything, and it's all true, all of it. I'm sure it is. Of course, considering that, I'm reading a book about living scarecrows. He pulled off his cap and scratched his stubby hair. I've got to check the book. I've got to see what to do about the bad corn. He was getting pretty worked up. It was making me feel a little scared. I've known Stanley my whole life. I think he's worked for Grandpa Kurt for more than 20 years. He's always been strange, but I've never seen him get so upset about something as unimportant as a bad ear of corn. Show us the scarecrows, I said, trying to get his mind off the corn. Yeah, let's see them, Mark joined in. Okay, the scarecrows, Stanley nodded. Then he turned, still thinking hard, and began leading the way through the tall rows of corn stalks. The stalks creaked and groaned as we passed by them. It was kind of an eerie sound. Suddenly a shadow fell over me. One of the dark scarecrows rose up in front of us. It wore a tattered black coat, stuffed with straw. Its arms stretched stiffly out at the sides. The Scarecrow was tall, towering over my head, tall enough to stand over the high cornstalks. Its head was a faded burlap bag filled with straw. Evil black eyes and a menacing frown had been painted on thickly in black paint. A battered old-fashioned hat rested on its head. "You made these?" I asked Stanley. I could see several other scarecrows poking up from the corn. They all stood in the same stiff position. They all had the same menacing frown. He stared up at the Scarecrow's face. "I made them," he said in a low voice. "The book showed me how." "They're pretty scary looking," Mark said, standing close beside me. He grabbed the Scarecrow's straw hat and shook it. "What's up?" Mark asked it. "The Scarecrow walks at midnight," Stanley said, repeating the phrase he had used at the train station. "He didn't use it at the train station. You were almost to your grandparents' house when he said that." Mark was trying to slap the Scarecrow a high five. "What does that mean?" I asked Stanley. "The book told me how," Stanley replied, keeping his eyes on the dark painted face on the burlap bag. The book told me how to make them walk." "Huh? You mean you can make the Scarecrows walk?" I asked, very confused. Stanley's dark eyes locked on mine. Once again, he got that very solemn expression on his face. "I know how to do it. The book has all the words." I stared back at him, totally confused. I didn't know what to say. "I made them walk, Jody," Stanley continued, in a voice just above the whisper. "I made them walk last week, and now I'm the boss." "Huh? The boss of the Scarecrows?" I stammered. "Do you mean—" I stopped when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the Scarecrow's arm move. The straw crinkled as the arm slid up. Then I felt rough straw brush against my face as the dry Scarecrow arm moved to my throat. With the exception of stupid puns, I like this. Which, for what I've read so far with the others, I've just been like, you could read it. Nothing special, I guess. I mean, if you want to. But no, I'm gonna actually tell you to read this because I'm actually interested in the Scarecrow stuff. I just wish we didn't have to meander around so much. I mean, I'm more of a person for wanting to get straight to the point. To use an expression, I don't like to be around the bush. I want to get straight to the point. And you can still have mystery and suspense and things going on if you get straight to the point. Because you're not taking the time. Because when you start diverting from the main line, it's called red herrings. Well, I think it might be Billy Bob Jr. Well, actually, if we, look at the records, Janet says that it was, Thornton. Well, okay, let's go investigate Thornton. No, it was actually Billy Bob the whole time. You went Thornton because he paid Thornton to go to the store and pick that shit up or some fuck. And that's would be acceptable meandering around to me. Because you're still investigating. It's just the criminal or whoever the bad person thing is trying to distract you. And it would just be nice if we could just get rid of the stupid puns and the wordiness and actually concentrate this on being a book for children to read rather than expecting them to have an IQ of 5. And how many pages is this? How many pages? 122? Yeah. Turn this into an actual book. And I don't mean like this little 122 page thing. Make it an actual book. Like an actual novel for kids to pick up and read. I mean, if they're gonna read shit like Harry Potter and Twilight, they can read an actual novel written well for them about, like, you could turn the Scarecrow thing into an actual decent novel. You could turn all of these into an actual decent novel if you wanted to actually work for it. But I'm starting to see that a lot of these in ways are so similar to all the other books. It's starting to feel like Mr. Stein's a one-trick pony, and that a lot of things he's just copying and pasting, and that's really sad. Probably after this, I'm gonna get online and look up to see if Mr. Stein has done anything other than Goosebumps in his entire life. Hopefully he has, and I hope they're much better than this. I really hope that the only reason it seems like a copy-paste and reusing a lot of the same ideas and themes is because they're kids' books, and people think kids are stupid, and they like stupid shit like puns. But really, this is just me harping on the series as a whole right now. And I really have no complaints about this particular book, except that I'm interested in reading more, because I want to know about the Scarecrows. But everything else, I'm just kind of like, eh. I will give props, though, that we're using a mentally challenged person as part of the story. And also something I wanted to talk about that I didn't when it was mentioned. In the first chapter, it talks about him saying that the main character, Jody, is, she's pretty, she's attractive to him. And we know this by the fact that he, his face blushes. In case people think, don't harp on that being weird or creepy, because that's actually pretty accurate for some people who are mentally challenged like that. I'm not gonna name names, but I know a person, she's, I don't know, late 50s, 60s. She's definitely MR. But her mind, the way it works, is, she's more like a kid. But, of course, she's still in an adult body, so she still, is interested in relationships. Or at least what she can understand of relationships. And when I lived with my mother, we used to live next door to a family who had two teenage sons. I think they were about 17 or so. And, of course, they're 17 and they're douchebags, when she comes around, because they know she's MR. They know she isn't what you would say as in right in the head. But they're 17 and they don't care, so they make fun of her. And the reason why they do this is because she didn't realize that being late 50s, 60s, her age, it was weird and not necessarily okay for her to be interested in underage guys, even though they're like 17 and about to turn 18. It does not compute in her head that is wrong because she is MR. Some MR people can understand this. It really depends on how bad. I'm not like an expert on like the brain chemistry of MR people, but it's like normal people. Everybody's different. And when I say normal, I mean people who are not MR. Some people will act like they're really mentally challenged, but they're just stupid. There's a distinction between somebody who is legitimately doesn't understand something, even though at their age they should be able to, versus somebody who is just a dumb fuck. It's not weird, it's not gross, it's just they don't know. They don't understand that there's this huge age gap there, and it's going to be perceived by people who are not MR as weird and wrong. Not to say that that if you fall in love with and truly care about somebody with MR, regardless of age, or even if nobody in the relationship has MR, but what I'm trying to say is, it's like a 5-year-old telling a teacher that she really likes him. And to that little girl, there's nothing wrong with it, because understanding why that is weird or wrong is totally beyond her understanding at this point in time. For an MR person, it's always going to be like that. They're not going to understand that no matter how old they get, crushing on somebody younger, so much younger than they are, is strange to the majority of the public, is what I'm trying to say. I don't think I'm doing a good job of it, but I'm trying. So, I don't want you, if you pick up this book, or if you have picked up in the book and didn't really understand why this guy who she's like, he's been in his 40s, 45, and I'm like 12. I'm 12 now. He's not some weirdo. He's mentally challenged, and so he doesn't understand that being a 40-something-year-old man thinking a 12-year-old girl is cute and pretty is weird. He doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand that it's wrong for him to do that. He probably has a concept of right and wrong, or in some cases they don't even have that, but they do have a concept of, Mom said not to do this, I'll get in trouble, so I shouldn't do this because I don't want to get in trouble, versus, Mom said not to do this because it's wrong, and I understand it's wrong, so I'm not going to do this. If I'm making any sense at all, I'm trying to explain stuff that I just don't know how to explain, but it's just, yeah. I mean, I've been around a lot of mentally challenged people, so maybe that helps in some regards, but anyway. Yeah, I'd say pick up The Scarecrow That Walks at Midnight. It'll probably be, interesting throughout. I just don't like the wordiness or the dumb puns, and, I think you should treat your children with, much more, as a lot smarter than children books like these typically portray them as. Because your kid can and will easily handle something like Harry Potter, something like Twilight, even though it is stupid as crap. They can handle this in a much higher writing capacity, is all I'm saying. You know, I want, like, Hardy Boys. Like, when I was reading about, I forget the specific title of that Hardy Boys book, but when I was reading about them versus, like, a terrorist dude called Bullet, you know, his code name was Bullet. I read that in middle school, and that was far more interesting to me than any of these Goosebumps could ever be to me at the same age range. You know, I'm reading Hardy Boys at 12 versus reading these Goosebump books at 12. And while these can probably hold my attention, they're not very high functioning level of reading material there. That's what I'm trying to say. So, I'm Caleb, and this has been Red Knot. Thank you for listening. Bye!